One of the common objections against the Christian faith is that there's not enough evidence for God. So as a Christian, you might be confronted by someone who says, listen, prove God exists and I'll believe in him. That to me initially sounds like an impossible request. How do I prove God exists? The Bible says God is invisible. God dwells in inexpressible light. No man has ever seen God. So many times as Christians, we feel overwhelmed by that kind of challenge. And certainly there are many approaches to apologetics that try to help you face that question head on. I like to think of it this way. The unbeliever presents an objection and the Christian comes back with answers. I think we can avoid that confrontation and the need to know and to employ deep philosophical arguments by recognizing the assumptions within the challenge or the objection. So when someone says to me, Mark, prove God exists before I believe in him, I'm going to actually turn it around on him and challenge his objection. This is what we call the presuppositional approach. That is, we know this person has unexamined assumptions in his objection, and before I try to answer those, I'm going to point those out. I'm going to raise those unaddressed assumptions and challenge them. So when someone says, prove God exists to me, my response is, what would it take to prove God exists to you? And this is not original with me. This has been around a long time, but I'm surprised at how few Christians have heard this. That is, I am now putting the ball back in the unbeliever's court to tell me what it would take to prove God exists. In other words, what it would take for God to do that would convince this person that the true God, the Christian God, and Jesus Christ, his Son, are the truth. So I'm asking the person, what would it take to prove God exists, where if God gave that to you, you would automatically believe? That's important because that often exposes that the unbeliever who's demanding evidence from you, even if he were to get the evidence that he wanted, would not necessarily believe. And this shouldn't surprise us because in the Gospels, Jesus performs miracles. He does signs that his opponents cannot deny were miracles from God, and yet they don't believe in him. They reject him and say, you've done this in the power of Satan. So I will present it back to the unbeliever. What would it take to prove God exists to you? About half the time I've had people say, that's a good question. I've never really thought about what I'm looking for. Others would probably say, I would want God to appear to me in some way that I knew it was him and to do or say something that would be definitive. So let's go down the list. If God appeared to you in a dream, would that be enough? Well, usually not. What if God appeared to you in a bright light? Well, that wouldn't necessarily prove that he was the true God because maybe they were having a stroke or having some cognitive problem. So if I keep pushing the unbeliever on, what would God look like that you would say, I know that's God for sure, and what would he do that would prove it beyond all doubt? Typically, people come back to, I would want God to appear and say or do something that was clearly miraculous so that I would know that I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't being tricked or fooled. And what I do then is say, I'm so glad that you're asking for that that's what you want. Let's go to the Gospels and see where God did exactly that. That is, let's go see what Jesus, who is the incarnation of God, the eternal Son of God, who assumes a human nature, and he lives and ministers for more than 30 years on this earth, and let's see what he said and did in the Gospels and see, is that enough for you? So I take the person from an impossible demand, prove God exists to me, right down to let's see what the New Testament says about Jesus. And you know what? Any Christian can do that. It's very difficult to argue philosophically for God. There are arguments for God philosophically, but I don't know that that's where most of the people you meet really are spiritually and what they're looking for. Rather, if I can take them to the person of Jesus and say, listen, you're asking for God to appear in bodily form. You're asking God to do something miraculous. Here it is right in the Gospels. We have 4 accounts of Jesus doing miraculous things, saying that he is the Son of God, that he is God in the flesh, that he and the Father are one. And the religious leaders who know who God is want to kill him because they say you're making yourself equal with God. And that's something any Christian can do. We can take an unbeliever to the Gospels, read the Gospels with them, and then challenge them. Do you believe that Jesus is who he says he is. So the next time someone says, prove God exists to me, get excited because it's about to get interesting.